Before we dive into this raw and emotional journey, take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Every interaction helps these deeply personal stories reach more hearts that need to hear them. There are moments when life doesn't scream its changes. It whispers them. Subtle, quiet, almost invisible. But if you listen closely enough, you can hear the very foundation of your world shifting under your feet. It began on an ordinary evening, one that should have blended into countless others, but it didn't. That night, Adam looked at me across our small living room, his face strangely still, his voice lower than usual. "The weather," he said, almost like a confession. "It's no longer on the same track." I didn't understand what he meant at first. His words were cryptic, carried by a weight I couldn't yet name. But something inside me, some buried instinct, tightened. His breath was uneven. The air between us, usually warm, with easy conversation, had cooled. "The readings," he continued, "the prayers, they're starting to be different." I stared at him, silently waiting for him to elaborate. But his gaze had already wandered, as if he was speaking to something larger, something I couldn't see. That was the first fracture. The first ripple. We had always been aligned. Our beliefs, our routines, our shared rhythms of prayer and faith had anchored us through every storm life had sent our way. But now, standing in our modest apartment, I felt something slipping. Something neither of us wanted to say aloud. Our relationship had been rooted in more than just romance. It was built on shared devotion, shared struggle, shared whispers to the heavens late into the night. We prayed together. We dreamed together. We survived together. There were moments in those early years that felt unbreakable. His hand wrapped around mine as we whispered the same words in unison, believing that as long as our voices rose together, nothing could pull us apart. But lately, even our prayers had begun to sound different. I would close my eyes and pour my heart out, asking for clarity, for patience, for our bond to remain strong. Yet when I listened to Adam, his words seemed heavier, distant, almost foreign. He was asking for release, for distance, for change. The shift wasn't sudden. It was slow, agonizingly slow. Like watching autumn leaves fall one by one, knowing winter is coming, but powerless to stop it. Conversations became more cautious. Simple topics felt strained. I began to hear more silences between his sentences. Not the comfortable silences we used to share, but vacant spaces, heavy, unresolved. There were nights I lay awake, eyes tracing the familiar cracks in our ceiling, while his back faced me in bed. His breathing remained steady, but I knew his mind was elsewhere, walking paths I could not follow. One evening, after another quiet dinner, I finally whispered the question I had been holding back for weeks. "Adam, where are you going?" He paused mid-step, his back still turned. "I don't know," he admitted softly, his voice trembling under the weight of honesty. "But I feel like I'm no longer where I'm supposed to be." The ache that bloomed in my chest was instant, like a blade slipping between my ribs. "Is it me?" My voice cracked. "No," he said quickly, spinning to face me, his eyes desperate. "It's not you. It's everything. The path I thought I was on. The faith I thought I understood. It's all shifting." He struggled to find the words. "Our prayers," he whispered. "They don't sound the same anymore." That was when I realized what frightened me most. It wasn't that we were falling out of love. It was that we were falling out of sync. Our hearts still beat for one another, but the language of our souls had started to drift. We were no longer reading from the same book, no longer speaking to the same heaven. One night, as if trying to calm the rising storm inside both of us, Adam held me tightly. His embrace was familiar, grounding, but even then, I could feel the quiet desperation beneath his touch. "Maybe," he whispered into my hair, "we just need to make peace with what's happening. Make peace." As if peace could be made with something that tore silently at the very seams of who we were. In the weeks that followed, we danced around the truth like fragile dancers on cracking ice. Neither of us dared step too firmly, fearing the ice would shatter completely. Honestly, I told him one night, my voice barely audible, "It's not easy to let you go." He held my face in his hands, his eyes shining with tears neither of us had the strength to shed. "I don't want you to let me go," he said. "Then stay." But even as I spoke, I knew his heart was already walking ahead of him. The hardest part wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was watching love dissolve, not in flames, but in whispers. A quiet unraveling of something sacred. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't arrive with shouting matches or slammed doors. It arrives softly, like fog rolling in, blurring the edges of everything once so clear. That's what we were living through. As the days passed, the gap between Adam and me continued to widen, not with explosive fights, but with long stretches of uneasy quiet. There were no accusations, no ultimatums, only silence, where once there had been laughter. It was as if we were standing on opposite banks of a river that had slowly risen between us, the water gentle, yet impossible to cross. The smallest things that used to bind us now seemed unfamiliar. The way he whispered his prayers, no longer in sync with my own. The way he stared out the window at night, as if searching for answers written in the stars. The way he would reach for my hand, only to pull away too quickly, as though even comfort had become complicated. I tried to hold on, desperately. I suggested small things at first, returning to places that once held meaning for us. Revisiting our favorite cafe, driving to the lake where we had first confessed our feelings years ago. He came along, always polite, always present in body, but never fully with me in spirit. The lake was the worst. We sat by the water's edge, the air cool and crisp, the sky wide open above us. It should have felt like home. Instead, Adam stared into the ripples, his brows furrowed, lost in thought. "Do you still see us here?" I finally asked, my voice barely louder than the gentle waves. He hesitated. "I want to," he whispered. "But wanting and believing aren't the same." I felt something inside me fracture. Up until that moment, I had been convincing myself that with enough patience, enough love, enough prayer, we could realign. But his words told me a truth I hadn't been ready to face. He was no longer sure we were meant to walk the same path. The shift in his spirit wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. A very faith that had once drawn us together was now what seemed to pull us apart. Our prayers no longer harmonized. Our hopes no longer reflected the same future. It wasn't that we didn't love each other. We did. But sometimes love alone isn't enough to hold two souls traveling in different directions. I began to pray differently after that night at the lake. Before, I had begged for restoration, for God to pull us back together, to heal whatever was unraveling inside him. Now my prayers grew quieter, not for repair, but for clarity, for peace, for the strength to let him go if that's where the path led. One night, after another long silence, Adam finally spoke words I had been both dreading and expecting. "Our story," he began, struggling to breathe the sentence into life. "I don't think it's on the same track anymore." The way he said it wasn't cruel. It was almost reverent, as if he was mourning it too. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. My chest felt tight, my heart beat loud against the stillness. "You're giving up on us," I whispered. "I'm trying not to," he said, voice breaking. "But what we believe, what we need, it's no longer the same." I wanted to scream, to demand he fight harder, to beg him not to let go. But all that spilled from my lips was a fragile whisper, "Don't leave." And in his eyes, I saw the answer before he said a word. The answer wasn't yes. The answer wasn't no. The answer was simply, "I can't stay." That was the most devastating part. It wasn't a clean break. He wasn't running away. He wasn't angry. He was lost. And because of that, I was losing him. In the weeks that followed, we lived in an emotional limbo. Two people still sharing the same roof, eating at the same table, sleeping in the same bed, but already oceans apart. Every morning, he kissed my forehead before leaving for work. Every evening, we exchanged polite conversation. But underneath it all was a quiet understanding. Our days together were numbered. I watched him change in ways I couldn't stop. His prayers grew softer, sometimes silent. He withdrew from our community, skipping gatherings and discussions that had once given him so much purpose. His eyes seemed constantly searching, not for me, but for something larger, something undefined, something I could no longer provide. One night, I found him sitting in the dark on our balcony, staring up at the stars. "What are you looking for?" I asked quietly. He closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "Permission," he said. "For what?" "To leave without destroying you." That's when I finally understood the true cruelty of love. Sometimes, the person who loves you most is the one who has to break your heart. Not out of malice, but because staying would do more harm than walking away. The days blurred together after that conversation. We both knew where this was heading. Neither of us wanted to name it, but the shadow of goodbye loomed heavier with each passing moment. There's a strange kind of grief when you lose someone who's still physically beside you. You share the same space. You exchange polite words. You even smile occasionally. But deep beneath the surface, everything is slowly unraveling. I woke each morning dreading the quiet. The spaces where words once lived became crowded with unspoken fears. When we sat together for dinner, the clinking of silverware echoed louder than any conversation. When we lay in bed, I could feel the vast distance between us, an invisible chasm growing wider with every breath. He held me, yes, but even his embrace had changed. His arms wrapped around me like a man cradling something fragile, something he feared might shatter under his fingertips. One evening, after another long stretch of heavy silence, I found the courage to speak words I never imagined myself saying. "Adam," I whispered, my voice shaking, "if you need to go, you can." His entire body stiffened. "Don't say that," he replied instantly, voice laced with pain. "Please." "But it's true," I continued softly. "Holding you here won't bring you peace. And pretending we're still walking the same road won't heal what's breaking between us." He buried his face in his hands. "I never wanted to hurt you," he choked. "I know," I whispered, "but we're both hurting anyway." That night, we cried together for the first time in months. Tears not born from anger, not from betrayal, but from helplessness, from love, from surrender. The next morning, the apartment felt colder. He didn't pack his bags yet. He didn't rush out the door. Instead, he moved through the day, as if savoring the last few drops of a fading dream. I watched him study familiar corners of our home. The framed photos, the worn couch cushions, the books we had read aloud on lazy Sunday afternoons. I watched him run his hand gently over the doorway where we once measured imaginary growth charts for the children we never had. There was so much unsaid, so many small deaths before the final one. A few days later, he finally spoke what we both knew. I found a place to stay. The words hovered between us like a suspended blade. When? I asked, my voice barely audible. Next week, I nodded, numb. There was nothing left to negotiate. During that final week, we moved like ghosts inside the home we built together. We folded laundry side by side. We prepared meals we barely tasted. We whispered prayers we no longer shared. At night, we still lay beside each other, but sleep rarely came. Instead, we held hands in the dark, as if clutching the final thread that still tethered us together. On his last night, Adam surprised me. He lit a single candle on the dining table, the same table where we once celebrated anniversaries and birthdays. He had prepared my favorite meal. We sat in silence for a long time, letting the soft glow of the candle do what words no longer could. Finally, he reached across the table, taking my hands into his. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For loving me, for seeing me, for letting me go when I couldn't let go of myself." Tears streamed down my face. "I always will," I whispered back. Later that night, as we lay together one final time, we held each other as tightly as we could, as if we could freeze the moment, anchor ourselves in that fragile space between ending and beginning. "I'm scared," he whispered into my hair. "So am I admitted. He pulled me closer. "What if this is a mistake?" I exhaled slowly. "Then we'll both carry that weight. But at least we'll carry it honestly." The sun rose too quickly the next morning. The moment had arrived. I stood by the doorway, watching as he zipped the final suitcase shut. The apartment looked different now, emptier, quieter. He approached me, eyes glistening. "I don't have the right words," he whispered. "Neither do I replied, my throat raw. We embraced one final time, long, tight, silent. When he finally stepped back, he paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Pray for me," he said. "Always," I whispered. Then he was gone. The apartment felt impossibly large after he left. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. The absence of his presence was everywhere. His slippers no longer waited by the door. His coffee mug sat untouched on the counter. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered in the bedroom, refusing to fade as quickly as he had. Every room whispered his name. The first few days, I tried to hold myself together. I cleaned. I rearranged bookshelves. I opened windows to let in fresh air, hoping it would blow away the heaviness pressing down on my chest. But every small task only reminded me of the life we had shared, and the life that was now only mine. I couldn't escape the memories. The chair where he used to sit and read aloud from old poetry books. The tiny crack on the bedroom wall we always joked about fixing, but never did. The balcony where he once traced constellations with his fingers, whispering myths under the moonlight. It was all still here, but he wasn't. The nights were the hardest. That empty space beside me in bed was a brutal reminder of what was lost. I would lie awake for hours, staring into the darkness, replaying every conversation, every prayer, every moment where maybe, just maybe, I could have said something different. Could I have fought harder? Could I have anchored him longer? Could I have saved us? But deep down, even in my grief, I knew the truth. He hadn't left out of cruelty. He hadn't abandoned me. He left because his soul was restless, caught between love for me and a growing distance from himself. And perhaps, in some twisted way, allowing him to leave was the final act of love I could offer. In my loneliest moments, I still whispered prayers, not for him to return, but for him to find what he was searching for. I prayed for his peace, even as I mourned my own. Days turned into weeks. The world outside kept moving, indifferent to my heartbreak. Friends reached out gently, offering comfort I could barely receive. "Time will heal you," they said. But time doesn't heal. It softens. It teaches you how to carry the weight so it feels less suffocating. I found small rituals to anchor myself. Morning walks became my sanctuary. With each step, I whispered silent mantras, trying to steady my heart. You are still here. You are still breathing. You are still whole. One morning, as I walked past the small park near our apartment, the one where Adam once surprised me with a picnic under the spring blossoms, I paused. The bench where we had sat together was empty now. But for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting behind my eyes. Instead, I felt stillness. Not peace, not joy, but a quiet kind of acceptance. Healing doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It seeps in quietly, like soft rain soaking dry soil. You barely notice it happening, until one day you realize you're breathing a little easier. The ache in your chest remains, but it no longer rules you. Around the third month, I finally gathered the courage to box up some of his things. Not to erase him, but to release the physical anchors that kept me circling the same grief. I folded his sweaters gently, pressing them to my chest for a moment before sealing them away. His books, his journals, the little notes we once left each other on sticky pads, all packed with care. A quiet ceremony of love and release. As the boxes disappeared into storage, the apartment felt lighter. Still empty, but lighter. I wasn't erasing him. I was making room for myself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting soft amber light across the apartment, I stood on the balcony, the same spot where Adam once searched for constellations. I whispered softly into the wind. We couldn't walk the same road, but I still carry you in the quiet corners of my heart. And as the wind answered with a gentle breeze, I closed my eyes and allowed myself, for the first time, to truly exhale. The journey wasn't over. But for the first time since he left, I believed that healing was possible. Grief doesn't disappear, it folds itself into you, like a quiet seam stitched into the fabric of who you are. And over time, you stop trying to erase it. You simply learn how to wear it. Months had passed since Adam left. What once felt like unbearable emptiness slowly shifted into a different kind of solitude, one I could live with. I no longer woke each morning with tears sitting heavy in my chest. Instead, I woke with gentler questions. Who am I now? What does life look like without him? Can I love myself in his absence? For so long, my identity had been tethered to us. Our shared routines, our shared faith, our shared future. When that future dissolved, I felt as though I had dissolved with it. But grief has a strange way of peeling back the layers we once built around ourselves. And beneath it, I began discovering pieces of me I had long forgotten. I revisited old passions that had once filled me with quiet joy. The paintbrushes I had stored in the closet for years found their way back into my hands. Canvases once left untouched began blooming with color once more. Shades that mirrored my shifting emotions. Soft blues of sadness, fiery reds of anger, pale golds of hope. The act of painting became my sanctuary, a place where words weren't necessary, and emotions could live freely without judgment. I also found myself reading again, not the shared theology books Adam and I once devoured together, but stories written by women who had walked paths like mine. Stories of heartbreak, of letting go, of rediscovering purpose beyond love lost. Their words wrapped around me like gentle hands reminding me, "You are not alone in this." I joined a small support circle, women who, like me, carried invisible scars. We gathered weekly. As I listened to their voices tremble, break, and heal, I found my own voice strengthening. We cried together, we laughed together, we held space for one another's pain, and in doing so, we stitched small patches of healing into each other's wounds. One evening, after months of these quiet gatherings, I sat alone by my window as rain traced slow rivers down the glass. And I whispered aloud, "I forgive you, Adam." Not because he had asked for it, not because he had wronged me, but because carrying anger was a weight I no longer wished to hold. Forgiveness wasn't a grand moment. It was soft, private, a quiet release of something heavy I had carried for far too long. Strangely, in forgiving him, I felt myself return. Not the woman I was before him, not the woman who shattered after him, but someone new, someone both softer and stronger. One morning, as spring returned and the city stirred to life beneath the rising sun, I stood before my mirror. For the first time in a long while, I recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes still held traces of sadness. Grief never fully leaves. But they also held resilience, a quiet knowing, a hard-earned peace. "I survived," I whispered. "I am still here." And that truth filled the entire room like light flooding through parted curtains. I no longer needed someone to complete me. I was whole, not because I avoided the breaking, but because I had walked through it, because I had held my own heart through the storm and emerged on the other side. Scarred, yes, but standing. Time didn't erase Adam's memory, nor did I want it to. Instead, time softened the sharp edges of our story, allowing me to hold our love gently, not as a wound, but as a chapter. A beautiful, complicated, unfinished chapter. Almost a year had passed since the day he walked out. The seasons had spun through their full cycle: summer's heat, autumn's surrender, winter's stillness, and now spring's fragile rebirth. And in many ways, I too had spun through my own seasons: loss, despair, emptiness, acceptance, and finally, something resembling peace. Then, one afternoon, entirely unexpected, his name appeared on my phone. I stared at the screen, my breath catching for a moment. We hadn't spoken since that final goodbye. I hesitated, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. What words could possibly live between us now? Finally, I answered, "Hello." His voice was soft, cautious. "Hi, I hope this isn't a bad time." "No," I replied gently. "It's okay." There was a pause, the kind filled with all the unsaid things that had lived quietly in the space between us for so long. "I've thought about you often," he said. "About us." "Me too," I whispered. He exhaled audibly. I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For letting me go." His words didn't carry guilt or expectation, only honesty. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," he continued. And in leaving, I discovered how lost I truly was. But I found my footing again. My faith looks different now, but it's steadier. And I know I wouldn't have found it if I had stayed, pretending for your sake. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't heavy. They were light, free. I always wanted you to find your peace, I replied softly. And I hope, he added, you found yours too. I smiled, a real full smile. I have. We didn't make promises to meet again. We didn't reopen old wounds or pretend we could return to what we once were. But we honored what we had shared. We released what had broken. And we stood, even if only for a moment, in the rare and quiet grace of true closure. After the call ended, I sat by my window, watching the afternoon sun filter through the leaves outside, and I realized. Love doesn't always end in bitterness. Sometimes it ends in gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, for the beauty that once was, for the resilience born from heartbreak. Our story had never been a tragedy. It had simply run its course. We were not failures. We were travelers who walked side by side for a time, and then, when the roads diverged, had the courage to part without destroying each other. That night, I lit a single candle, the same way Adam had done on his last night home. But this time, it wasn't to mourn what was lost. It was to honor what had been. To honor love, growth, and the silent courage